Sorry.
We will have one of the DNC vice chairs, who also happens to be our party chair here in Minnesota, Ken Martin. He doesn't know this yet, but he'll be coming on. and we've got and a number of other things. I also want to ask people, I'd like to have just to throw in a little more fun, have a weekly Hall of Fame and Hall of Shame for framing. So if you run across something that is truly exceptionally good, or if you run across something that is truly exceptionally bad in framing, then let us know. And if you'd like, you could present it when we do this, or otherwise we would do it for you if you don't want to do that part. And so there's that. We will send a follow-up email after this with links that we talk about and other such things. We should have our schedule coming up here. We're going to try to get as much of it as we can in the next couple of days. We'll get that out in this follow-up email. Otherwise, watch the ones that come from Eventbrite, or MailChimp. So I think that's it. So
Okay. And as always, if you have questions while I'm talking, you can put them in the chat. George will be monitoring the chat tonight. And then I will break a couple of times for questions and discussion. So just know that you can always do that. And before I get started, I just want to remind people that at the last webinar that we did on December 13th was part 1 of this on persuasion. And it was about like the basics of good communication around persuasion. I sent everybody who's coming tonight, I sent the PowerPoint and the accompanying article with that. So you can read that and see it. But just know that I talked a little bit about the sender-receiver model of communication, the who, what, when, where, how, why, persuasion, and about listening. And uh-oh.
Is that me? Yeah, turn that off.
Okay.
Here we go.
Why does this happen? Oh, rats.
And then staying, not putting people in defense mode. So that's what I talked about last time. And I also, as we move forward, I want to thank Hobie Stocking. He's on this call right now because at that last webinar, he introduced the concept to me of thinking about this, not in terms of persuasion, but about attracting people to your side. And I really like that. So I worked that into this presentation. So I just wanted to give credit where credit's due around my thinking on that. So now I'm going to share my screen. And you should be able to see my PowerPoint presentation right now. And to get started,
okay.
I just want to go over a couple of definitions. First, the definition of persuasion, or to persuade, is to cause someone to do something by asking, arguing, or giving reasons, or to cause someone to believe something or to convince them to believe something. And the way I look at it is persuasion is the art of communicating with someone to get them to take an action you desire that also meets their needs. And then I looked up the definition of attraction, or to attract. And that is to pull or draw toward oneself, or to draw by appeal to natural or excited interest, emotion, or aesthetic sense. And I think that works really well when we're talking about framing in George Lakoff's work, because we always talk about appealing to people's emotions by using your values, about lighting up brain cells that are attached to people's emotions. And I think the word attract actually does a better job of describing that. So, and sometimes I think persuasion can be used if you're trying to get somebody to take a very specific action, but to attract somebody to your worldview or to your view it is more of an attraction rather than a persuasion. Now I'm going to go into George Lakoff's work, and I took all of this coming up from the all new Don't Think of an Elephant, and very specifically from the chapter of how to talk to conservatives. And so first of all, I want to say, this is a direct quote from George Lakoff. When we say what we believe, we are using frames that we think are accurate. so so what that does is we're not trying to spin or use propaganda or manipulate people. We're saying what we believe, and we're using framing and our values and things like that to do that. Now, what George Lakoff says in a lot of words, and I'm boiling this down to a much fewer words, but when you're speaking with somebody and you're trying to attract them to your side, stay calm, be sincere, and listen with respect. And those of you who are here in December might remember when I talked about listening for understanding. And that means really listening to somebody. So we'll go back that you in order to understand where people are coming from and to be able to respond to them, you have to really listen to them. And listening is not something most people do very well. So just remember to listen for understanding. Maintain civil discourse and control strong emotions. If you are trying to attract somebody to your side, if you're not having a civil conversation, that will never happen. So control your emotions, stay calm. And when you're talking to somebody, and if you can't do that, if somebody triggers you, then you just need to leave the conversation, either by just walking away or changing the subject, because if your goal is to attract somebody to your side, it will never happen if strong emotions and you come onto the table and you don't have a really positive discourse. Know your audience and who can you attract. And George and I are going to go through a little role play demonstration, so we'll kind of talk about that when we get there. And George Lakoff also says to compel respect. And you do that by staying steadfast in your beliefs, but by also don't go on the defensive. And those of you remember when I talked about defense mode last time and putting other people into defense mode, remember also you can go into defense mode if somebody triggers you. And when you go into defense mode, you can't hear what the other person's saying anymore. You can't listen. They can't listen to you. And then you start getting into that negative discourse that is not going to be helpful at all. So stay steadfast and compel respect and don't get on the defensive. Again, if you're finding yourself that you can't get out of that mode, then you need to end the conversation. And these next two kind of go together. And we'll talk about this a little bit. For anybody who's new here, you might not know what we mean by framing, but that's about how somebody thinks about something. And so what you never want to do is when you're talking to somebody is respond in their frame. And let's take an example, and it's an example that's coming up, but say we're talking about free healthcare for everyone. If they go into a economic frame, you don't want to respond within that frame. Then you have taken the conversation and you've put boundaries around it, and you then can't talk about what you want to talk about is perhaps your value of everybody having healthcare, people being healthy, people being able to realize their potential because they don't have to worry about their health, et cetera, et cetera. So you never want to respond in a frame that you don't agree with. And by doing that, you do not use facts and logic to try to get them out of that frame or out of that way of thinking. If somebody's thinking in an economic mode and you keep talking and you try to argue with them in that frame, all you're doing is lighting up the brain cells for that frame, and it just makes the path to that thought process even wider and easier for them to get to. So you want to stay out of their frame. So you want to reframe the discussion by saying things, well, like, this is how I see it, or I have this perspective. And then you reframe that discussion in your perspective, from your worldview. And another direct quote from Lakoff is, once your frame is accepted into the discourse, everything you say is common sense. So once they've accepted your frame and you start talking in that frame, then everything, you're on the same page and everything you say is common sense. Other things that George Lakoff will say is use future projection. Wouldn't it be great if our grandchildren have to worry about rising sea levels? wouldn't it be great if people didn't have to worry about going bankrupt if they have a major health issue? Wouldn't it be great if every US citizen could vote in a free and fair election? Use future projection. Wouldn't it be great if? Because likely they'll probably agree with that, because how, yeah, that would be a great world to live in. So now you can establish some level of agreement. If they don't agree with those things, then maybe they're not persuadable. Maybe you can't attract them to your side. Tell a story. The best thing you can do is tell a story about that is your story. Whatever, if you have a story that relates to the issue that you're talking about, use it, because stories are 100 times more powerful to attract people over to your side than facts and logic. People love stories. We were evolved to listen to stories and like stories. So use stories. Best, like I said, best if you can use your story or a story that somebody else told you. Those are the best stories that you can use. So have stories. If you have an issue that you're advocating for, have stories about that issue. And always, always, always start with your values. Always. So why is something important to you? You say, I believe, da, 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 da. That kind of gets you into that values discussion. So always start with your values. So I'm going to unshare right now. Does anybody have any questions about what I've talked about so far?
I'm curious if you have any insight on sharing stories for minors by chance. Our company right now is focusing on a project involving youth mental health, and it's really hard to tap into the storytelling aspect for people under 18. I'm curious if you have any experience with that, with how to tell a story without legally not being allowed to.
To be honest, I don't, but you do run into, I'm wondering if there's not, are you talking about talking to other adults, but about children's mental health?
Yeah, just sharing stories. Let's just say there's a suicidal 16-year-old. How do we tell their story while still being super anonymous and respecting their privacy and who they are as a person, while still tapping into the feelings of adults and other teenagers going through the same experience?
I'm wondering if you could tell their story without giving out any information that would track it back to that young person. I know somebody who, and tell their story, but being very careful to not share any information that could be identifying. I don't know, does anybody else have any thoughts about that? If anybody has worked in this field or?
We don't have experience in
Yeah, we don't.
in-
So I would hate to.
telling stories to or about children like that.
Closest outcome was I said this is a composite story about various kids I've worked with, and just made up a kid and made up a name and pulled pieces of other people's stories to illustrate, the situation that was being discussed. We're talking about how domestic violence affects kids.
Okay.
And I just made up, this kid is based on the story of several students I've worked with.
I would weigh in too on having worked in education my whole career about you could talk to educators about, circumstances they've dealt with throughout their careers. And I think they could give you some pretty good feedback on, things that were very positive for kids that were helpful for them or families. And then some things maybe that didn't work very well. And if you had to do it again, how you might do something differently.
And then we have our two general caveats. One, if you tell a story, it should be a story. It should be your story if you have it, which obviously isn't going to work in this case. Or tell stories, but make sure there's stories of somebody who's experienced it. It can be the parent of a child or a child, but or you say up front, like Nancy mentioned, this is a composite story. I'm not going to use names. I'm not going to put any identifying information here because we respect our patients or our clients' rights. anonymity here, but I don't know. Cassidy, is that helpful?
Yeah, that is super great insight, just hearing from everybody else with that, because we've been struggling kind of in-house with like balancing how to tell it without telling it in a way. So thank you
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah, that's usually a good way. And for everybody else, the stories, like we said, like for candidates, if candidates are going to tell a story, they have to tell a story they've experienced themselves or heard it from someone who experienced it directly, so that you're authentic when you're telling it. Or if you can't be authentic in that way, like I said, just mention that these are true events. These are based on true events. The names have been changed to protect the innocent, kind of a thing. So, okay,
Any other questions?
stories that have common ground. And yeah.
And yeah, and Virginia said, maybe I feel is a better way to talk about a value than I believe. And that's definitely true. So those types of words, I feel, I believe, but that will start to evoke your values. Okay, so now George and I are going to do a role play demonstration about framing. And what we're going to do is, and if you read the article that I sent, this is in the article, almost word for word, what we're going to do now. So if you haven't read it, this will be all fresh for you. But if you've already read it, then now you will be getting it through a different channel of communication. So it's not bad to hear something twice.
And you will find out why I am not an actor.
Okay, so we have this scenario, and this is the scenario we're looking at. I am a volunteer advocate for a group that promotes and develops the passing of legislation on free healthcare for all Americans. Don't get caught up in what I called it. That's just what I did for this particular scenario. And now I'm going out canvassing in my neighborhood, and my goal is to determine people's opinions on the issue, and to ask people to contact their legislators in support, or join your group, or get them to do something, to get them to take an to do something active, or to at least bring them over to your side of the issue. So this is what we're going to do. So it's a nice day, and I'm going out in my neighborhood, and I hope to have some productive conversations. So first neighbor A. Hi, I'm Lisa. I live over on the next block. I'm going around the neighborhood to advocate for something I feel strongly about: free healthcare for everyone.
Hey, wait a minute, I don't believe all that socialist crap. Liberals are ruining this country with all their socialist ideas. Get all your forms and stuff away from me.
Thank you for your time, sir. So this person is not persuadable in the short time frame that you have. Clearly, they are hostile, and it would be a waste of your time to try to engage with this person. This person has a generally negative view of liberals in general. And so to get him to come around to your to your view on free healthcare for all is just not going to happen in this time period. But if you see this gentleman in your neighborhood at an event, or over in your neighbor's driveway drinking a beer, King of the Hill style, you could go over and perhaps engage this person in a values conversation, and engage with him like over the long haul. But right now he is not persuadable, and so just move on. Okay, neighbor B. Hi, I'm Lisa. I live over in the next block. I'm going around the neighborhood to advocate for something I feel strongly about: free healthcare for everyone. I'm in a group, and we're trying to get some legislation moving on this issue.
I absolutely believe that we need free healthcare for all. I've been hoping that I would meet somebody in this neighborhood who's doing something about that. It's so nice to meet you.
That's great. Well, I'm involved in this group. Okay, so now this person's already on your side. So you don't need to persuade them or attract them over to your side, but you might need to use a little bit of persuasion to get them to join your group, or to get them to take some kind of an activist position. The one thing you don't want to do with somebody who's already on your side is to try to keep talking about things to bring them over to your side. So I wouldn't keep on saying like, oh, well, I believe in free healthcare for all because of, the protection of all humans and things like that. I don't need to do that. And George often talks about in sales, there's something called buying it back. Once somebody already is on your side, or once you've already sold them on something or whatever, to keep talking about it actually starts to make them think like, why do they keep thinking they have to sell me on this? So stop. You don't need to do that. You could talk about how great free healthcare would be, etc., just like in a neighborly way. But now with this person, what you want to do is persuade them to take an action, whether it's to join your group or write their legislators or whatever. So now that's your next level, is you want to persuade them to do something. Now, neighbor C. Hi, I'm Lisa. I live over on the next block. I'm going around the neighborhood to advocate for something I feel strongly about. I'm in a group and we're trying to get some legislation moving on this issue.
You know, I don't know about free health care for all. It would make our taxes go way up. I don't think the country can afford it.
So now this person is thinking of this issue in an economics scarcity frame. Well, here's how I see it. I believe that good health is one of the most important aspects of being human. People can't achieve their full potential if they're in poor health. Our current system leaves way too many people out. So now I've reframed the discussion to a protection or an empowerment frame.
So I agree that people should be able to access good health care. I feel so bad when I hear about people who can't get the care they need or they go bankrupt.
So now you can see you've touched on their value of caring and protection for their fellow humans. So you've been fairly successful at changing the frame.
I guess I'm lucky because I get good insurance through my job.
You know, I used to have great insurance through my job, but I don't work there anymore. I had to get private insurance in order to keep my premiums reasonable. I have a huge deductible. I'm afraid I'm going to get sick or need surgery and I won't be able to afford the deductible. Wouldn't it be great if people didn't have to worry about that? So now I've used a story, and it's my story. It actually is my real personal story. I've used the story to illustrate the problem with our current system and to reinforce their value around people having access to healthcare. And I've also used future projection by saying, wouldn't it be great if people didn't have to worry about that?
You know, if that was my situation, I'd be afraid too. And it would be great if people didn't have to worry about that. But I'm still worried about how free healthcare for all would work. How would it get paid for?
Now they've slipped back into the economic scarcity frame. Okay, I can hear that you have concerns about the cost. I have a brochure that talks about that in more detail. We could go over it now, or I could leave it with you to read. I can leave you my phone number too, if you have any further questions. And we're having a community meeting about this in March. So here's more information about that. I believe our country will be stronger if everyone has access to free, high quality healthcare. So first, I've acknowledged that I've listened to them by saying, I can hear you have concerns about the cost. Then I return to a protection and empowerment frame. My last sentence. It's also another frame that this would be is a public investment for private success frame. It's also a patriotic frame because I've said our country would be stronger, and I care about our country. It's saying that I care about our country and I want it to be stronger. So, go ahead, neighbor C.
Oh, well, I have to pick up my daughter from professional wrestling class. Please leave me the information and I'll check it out. You've given me something to think about. Thanks for coming by.
And thank you. Please don't hesitate to call if you have questions. I hope to see you at the community meeting.
Oh, sorry, I meant ballet class.
So this person started off thinking about this issue in a conservative economic frame. But when I brought up the more nurturant liberal frame of protection and empowerment, they were able to switch to that because they share that value as well. And if I had stayed in that economic frame by showing them the brochure that talks about how this would work, and by saying, somebody's paying for, there's all kinds of things you could say in that economic frame, but you've bound the conversation into that frame then, and now it just becomes an argument about how much it's going to cost and who would pay for it. By switching the frame, I was able to light up other brain cells in that person that got them to think about this in a slightly different way. And I was able to engage with them on that level. Like I said, I switched it back. I was able to hear their cost concerns and talk about that a little bit, but that was only after I was able to frame switch with them. And, you know, neighbors C may not come around to this worldview in the short term, but they were clearly willing to listen. And maybe I planted a seed, and they may be more willing to engage with others who share that worldview in the future. So are there any questions or comments at all about these scenarios? Now, I understand these are very simplistic. Obviously, a real conversation with somebody would be way more nuanced than that. It was just mainly to show you, to take Lakoff's Lakoff's positions and put them into something that, so we could use that to illustrate Lakoff's positions on this. So are there any questions? Oh, okay, Wendy.
Hey, Lisa, it almost seems like if you were taking notes on this, after you stepped away from the door, especially if it's somebody who's, in your neighborhood and you might see them on your next canvassing effort for something else or something related even. Almost seems like you should be making notes. Like I started off with name your frame, and he went to the economic frame, and I returned to the protection frame, and and he actually could relate to that, because the next time you go, you might want to be able to hearken back and say, now when I knock on his door, I'm going to lead off with the protection frame, because I know he's got some brain cells that fire on that. Just a thought.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think it's probably always a good idea to take notes in these situations, especially if you think you're going to see that person again and you're going to have another conversation with them.
And then Lisa, we've got a question in the chat from Wendy. Wendy says, it seems to me that when you change the frame of a conversation, you need to be careful that the other person doesn't feel you are dissing them by not respecting their view, particularly if they ask, how can we pay for this? And your response was, I worry about the people who go bankrupt. I would reply, you didn't answer my question. How can we pay for this?
And I definitely hear that concern. And George, you can feel free, or anybody else can feel free to weigh in on this too.
Well, I would just say, some of the things that we talk about here sound like prohibitions, like don't ever talk about costs. In this particular situation, we have a really, the economic frame is one that we might be able to take back. In this case, one thing that can be said is, well, I understand what you're saying. How would we know what a good system would be? How would we know if this system would work? So to answer your question about cost, there are a lot of people who wondered about that before, and they've looked around because we're one of the only countries that doesn't do this in the developed world. And so when we look at the other countries that do it, it costs less and the outcomes are better. We used to be at the top. We're not at the top anymore because our system just doesn't work as well as this other way to do it. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit more if you want.
Well, I was really more concerned not about the cost in particular, but about the fact that you could really, if I was talking to somebody about something and I thought that they were changing the conversation rather than addressing my concern, I would not be listening to them after that. I would feel manipulated.
Yeah, absolutely. Here, and this is shortened a bit. One thing that you can do is you can draw the conversation out a little bit. I have concerns about the cost, and just say, well, tell me about those. You don't have to offer a message about cost right away, but go ahead and listen and ask them what's going on. I had many years in sales, and one of the things that I discovered was the more that I could draw out of my customer just by asking questions about what kind of company is it, what kind of widgets you make, what's your position here, what is your boss like, all that. And the more questions I asked, I cannot tell you how many times that, first off, I might have been the only person who listened to them, and second, I found all sorts of things that I know I would have said to really step in it that I was able to avoid by doing that. And, I mean, I think there's that respect. Lisa was talking about respect. If you listen to people, that shows respect. It also opens a conversation up because it allows, this is the Thanksgiving problem. I have my crazy, I have one sane brother-in-law and I have a crazy brother-in-law. And I don't talk to my crazy brother-in-law, but my sane brother-in-law I can talk to, and we don't agree on a lot of stuff, but we can open up, tell me about that. And just let them go for a while. And then you can say, and like Lisa said here, I can hear you have concerns about the cost. And I can see what those are. I'd be happy to talk to you at some point about those. If you want to talk about them now, that's fine. Or I've got a brochure here that has information, and maybe there's some things that I have that might help you see how we can do that. And you're being respectful and nice. I hear you, Wendy. I worry about that too. And how do we not diss somebody? Because the moment that they think that you're looking down on them, which is what they're being told, if you show them something different and they're shocked, and I'll only go on for another 30 seconds. I found that when you do listen to folks and then you offer them another way of looking at it, even the folks on the hard right will turn around about a third of the time and at the very least say, I never thought about it that way. They honestly say they've honestly never thought about it that way because they've been drilled over and over with what they should think about. So you've been nice to them, you listened, and you offered something different. Here's how I see it. And, you planted a seed. You may not have made the sale, but they're going to let you back in the door. That was a good question, Wendy. Thanks.
Yeah, it is. And I do think, and so that's, what George said. Like I said, this is a very quick role play just to demonstrate concepts, but right, exactly. Just listening to what they have to say. But then at some point you may want to say, but here's the way I see it. And then switch it over to but after you've demonstrated that you are willing to listen to them, I think that's a really good point.
There's another question that Joey has from Washington and Seattle, Washington, and free is a trigger word for some folks. Lisa and I had a discussion about this earlier. And better to start with how healthcare costs bankrupt people, how bad it is to have employers control your access to healthcare. And
I could have called it universal healthcare because that is what people are calling it, around this concept. But, it is interesting to me how the conservatives have really owned that economics frame around the concept of universal healthcare, that immediately people go to, how can we afford it? And people go to that all the time. And really, we're already paying for it, right? And so it just depends on, now it's just who's paying for it and who's not making a whole boatload of money off of it. And, but yet, so that shows you, because that seems to me so common sense, but it shows you how the conservatives have been so strong in this message that that's what people go to, that in this country, one of the richest country in the world, we can't afford that.
And remember that sometimes, quite often, Republicans' message is they chose the cost frame specifically because, in order to frame so effectively against what we might say, they have to know what the reality is. The people who are doing the framing know that it costs less every other place that it's been tried. And they know that. So what they do is they go, well, the liberals, they're not really good about framing. So they won't be saying that, but we need to make sure they never do. So we're going to jump on the economic frame and we're going to say it costs more, even though it doesn't. And so or there's voter fraud when there is no voter fraud, and that's a cover for the voter suppression they're doing. They're projecting onto us what they do. And so look to what they say for clues about what they're really doing. Then in the stop phase, those of you who've been heard part of the stop, drop, and roll thing, in the stop phase, as you log those things in, you start to see what they're doing.
And I'm going to talk about that next.
Okay.
Then we can So are there any
Let-
more questions or comments about this?
Let me throw one last thing in.
Okay.
Real quick. Sorry. Virginia Stark had her and a group up in her area in Minnesota has come up with, I think, the very best healthcare framing that I've heard yet. It's healthcare made easy. And it's great. You can do great stories about that. Everything about healthcare is hard. And
It's so hard.
everybody's got a hard healthcare story. This is, and certainly everybody's got an insurance story. So healthcare made easy. So you can talk about why it's not easy, and then you can talk about how the solution is easy. And I just love that. That's one of the best frames. And it came from a group of people just like us who sat down and talked it out. Virginia had as a group up there, and they just came through with it all. Right, Virginia? I know you're here somewhere.
Yep,
Anyway.
I'm here.
Yep. So
Yep,
thanks for
yep.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to move on just quick, and then we always have more time for discussion at the end. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so now what Lakoff says, and I know for some people, if this is like your first time at one of our webinars, or if you've never been to our workshop, you may be a little confused by this talk about framing and that kind of thing. And that's really just how you think about something. And George and I, and George talked about our 3.5-hour workshops. We have a method that we use to help people think through these things. And it's called stop, drop, and roll. And you stop and analyze the situation. You drop what doesn't work, like facts and logic or staying in their frame and things like that. And then you roll with a well-framed message based on your values. So you start with your I feel statements, I believe statements, your why you care about this, and then back it up to then specific action. So I just want to show you, because like Lakoff says, be prepared. Well, sometimes you go out and you're going to be talking about an issue with somebody and you might not be prepared. You might know what you think about it, but you don't know what other people are saying about it. So how can you change the frame if you don't really understand what frame they're in? So we created this thing, this form called a stop analyzer. And let's see, did that pop into there?
Yep.
Oh,
So you
okay.
got,
That's not what I want. And so, all right, never mind. I'm going to have to do this now. Okay. Okay.
we will get that to you
And
anyway.
yeah, we'll send you this stop analyzer so you can look at it. And this is something that is really helpful to do in groups, because lots of people thinking about this is more effective than just you thinking about it by yourself. But first of all, you want to go, what's your issue? And then what specifically needs to be done about that issue. So that's what you're looking at. Now, here's where you get it. What are people, this is the analysis. What are people saying about this issue? Like, think of everything that you heard that people are saying about an issue. So you're prepared when somebody else brings this up. What are people saying? Your opposition to this, the people who are on your side, the people in the news and things like that. What are you hearing about this issue? And then there are dominant words and phrases that just keep coming up over and over again. And especially if it's from the opposition side, they've probably been messaged to death on this. And so they're using the same words over and over again, like critical race theory and things like that. And saying that code words, phrases, dog whistles, straw man arguments, what are being employed in this issue? And then can you discern what the frames are? What are your opponents using, and what are your frames around this issue? So we talk about worldviews in our 3.5-hour workshop, and nurturant worldviews might be around protection and empowerment and those kinds of things, more people-centered types of worldviews, like I said, nurturant worldviews. What moral values are your opponents using in this? And then how does your opponent's frame or story limit the discussion? So like I said about the healthcare example, if you stay in an economic frame, then you can never get to other frames like values around, caring about people's health and caring about empowering people and public protection for private success. If everybody's healthy, that's success for everybody, right? So you can never get to those frames. You can never get to that if you stay constrained by the frame that your opposition has. So that is our stop issue analyzer, and we will send that to you. And that's very helpful for you to think about what your issue is, and then to be able to discern their frames and then know when to get out of those frames and introduce another frame into the discussion. And then, like I said, drop what doesn't work and roll with a well-framed message based on your values. Are there any questions about that? Well, heck, we might get out of here early tonight. Any comments, any suggestions? We're always open to hearing what other people have to say.
Lisa?
Yeah.
I just want to say, I really liked when you're talking a little bit ago, when you do your role playing, saying you were from a group, but you offered the people either a brochure or you said you were going to have a meeting. And it just made me realize that how many candidates out there don't utilize that concept. They could set up all kinds of meetings, and they often do, but people don't come. But if you went door knocking on a particular issue and said, if you want more information or if you want to hear more about this, we're going to have a meeting, or I have a brochure here. I just think it's really good information to have available if you're door knocking when you don't know what you're going to be faced with. But to have something, if someone is even semi-hostile to you, to have something to say, I don't have all the answers, but we are going to have a meeting about this, and there will be people there who can answer some of your more pointed questions or something. So I did like that. And I'm just wondering what other people think about that in terms of a candidate with door knockers doing something like that.
I'll jump in and say what I really like about that is that you're asking the person to do something. You have an ask there. You're giving them an opportunity to do something, but you're actually asking them to do it. Again, going back to sales, a lot of people don't make the sale because they never ask for it. And so sometimes just asking is important. The other thing is sometimes we have Kristen Bonner here. She is a representative in Minnesota. And so as a candidate, people love to meet candidates, person to person. And having that conversation, a lot of times, and Kristen, I'm sure you can vouch for this too, that you run across people who might not have otherwise voted for you, but after talking with you, all of a sudden they're cool with it. You've had that experience, right?
I indeed have. Or even folks like, I had a gentleman once who he had seen some video on social media or something like that. And I came to his door and he said to me, "Oh my gosh, you really are like that in real life." I said to my wife, I wanted someone who was a breath of fresh air. And I wondered, is she really like that? And here you are at my door, and this really is you. And so it can definitely work in your favor when you just show up at someone's door. And I've had some pretty hardened folks who were independents or libertarians, or even some moderate conservative folks who maybe would not have come to my side, but after really just talking to them about basic common sense things, they're like, I kind of like the way you think. I get
Not
it.
so bad.
You're not too bad, right? And they were like, I thought you were this evil Democrat progressive. You were it was down with everything. And
Mhm.
now I realize you're just a regular person like me and you and me, and you actually care. You really do have my best interest at heart. So it
And
really started.
if you had the right kind of event that you could invite them to, all of a sudden you're beginning to even solidify that more. My gosh, this representative is inviting me to this thing. I'm going to go. I'm hobnobbing with the cool people now, but you got to make sure it's not maybe too democratic at that point, but some
Yeah,
kind
and we do
you know what I
sometimes
mean?
do that, George, where we have a event like a meet and greet at someone's house in an area, and we'll do door knocking around that area in the week leading up to the event and invite people to the event and bring like a little quarter sheet with the information on it and hand it right to them.
Now, if your group who's putting that together and the people who are circulating among the crowd also get this framing thing and also know how to open up an idea or open up a conversation and attract people and listen, all of a sudden now you're planting a bunch of seeds. Very cool. And
I actually think that's a great idea. And I think how helpful that would be for the people out door knocking for you or for a candidate or for an issue to like say, well, we're doing this. This is coming up because you can't always answer everybody's question either. And so, yeah, that's, I think, is a really great way of helping the door knocker as well.
let's see, and I see that Hobie's got he's doing some deep canvassing in conservative areas like Plymouth, Minnesota. I'll forward the training docs. So we'll get a link to you on that too, which by the way, as you guys are running across things that you think would be good for the group, when we have one of these things, just throw them in the chat or email them with it, the next morning. And then we quite often throw those things in the follow-up doc. Make sure. So the talk about the PBS series and 60 Minutes that Liz and Wendy were talking about on the StoryCorps that's in the chat.
That was in 60 Minutes last night.
Yep.
Yeah,
And I'll have those links too.
Yeah, I'll get.
And there was something very similar on the NewsHour tonight, which is probably available on their website. They talked about the StoryCorps and some groups that try to get various people together to speak.
Right, it's actually a nationwide project. It's so fascinating. The 60 Minutes devoted like 20 minutes to it, and this gentleman goes around the country. He has a whole team. They call them facilitators. They pair up people from different ideological spectrums. They put them in a room. But they have some sort of common ground. Maybe both are a nurse, but one's very conservative, one's very liberal, and they talk to one another. And he said it's very hard, and they listen, and they've changed minds. It's very interesting. It's really well worth the 20 minutes to watch it.
Absolutely. I'll be looking for that. So 60 Minutes last night. Okay.
It would be interesting to compare that with how they used to be called Better Angels, but now it's Braver Angels.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be interesting to compare the results in both, because so far Braver Angels have been the only ones out. They've been the only ones out there doing something like this that I'm aware of, which is a little different. The core concept is put a group of liberals, say, in the middle, and then around the outside of that circle are conservatives, and the liberals talk about who liberals are and who they think conservatives are, and then they switch positions. There's apparently no questions or anything at that point, and they do other things. But I like this idea that they've apparently pre-selected people, so there must be a questionnaire, and then they pick some common ground.
Yeah, and apparently they have a really long kind of application or waiting list to do these stories, and then they record him. He's even putting these stories in the Library of Congress.
Cool.
Wow.
It's really, really fascinating. So
Clever
worth
people.
looking at. Yeah.
All right.
Well, I'm still sharing, sorry, but I have one more slide. Just because I just want to leave off with, this is a direct quote from George Lakoff. He took in his book, The All New Don't Think of an Elephant. This is the last words in the book. And he took everything he said and put it into these 4 bullet points. Show respect, respond by reframing, think and talk at the level of values, and say what you believe. So that's Lakoff's work, or at least in that chapter, into those 4 bullet points. And if you do that, then you should be able to have some effective conversations. But I would also say the being prepared part is also very important to understand where people are coming from. And are there any other questions or comments? Because that's all I have.
Well, I'll follow up with the links that we talked about, and then also, Gary, I don't know if you know this, I think Michelle Pallas, the Liberal Leadership League in Michigan, it has an event coming up here pretty soon. I don't know if you know about this.
I've seen the promotion. I think I may be signed up already.
I'll get that out. Do you remember what the topic was?
Oh, now you've got, I can look it up in a minute.
That's okay. I can guarantee you, Michelle Pallas, who runs that, and she hauled us out to Michigan some years ago to do a 2-day stint in Royal Oak area, and they did exactly what we wanted to see happen. They spawned their own training thing. They got all the people in that area. They're indivisible in their congressional district. The Democrats in the congressional district got together, learned framing, and they train like we do. So we stay in touch with them. I'll find that and put that in the links also, assuming it hasn't already happened. But also, just so you know about these folks, and Michelle was on one of the webinars last spring or summer, and very interesting person and great stuff they're doing over there in Michigan. So otherwise, don't forget about the Hall of Fame and the Hall of Shame. If you see examples, get me examples. If you can link to a video that's there, or if it's hard to link to it and it's a news site or something, and you can get it to me quick enough, sometimes I can go there and do a screen grab. We'll do that. But good examples and bad examples. And other than that, we topped out tonight at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 states. So thanks everybody for coming in from where you are. And we hope to see you again. Tell your friends. And when we do the workshop, again, that is great for people who haven't been going to these webinars to pick up more and more about what's going on, or just as a refresher course. So we really get a kick out of having everybody here and hearing from you. So can't wait to see you next time.
Hey, George, I got a story to take you out since Lisa, since you brought up healthcare. 7 or 8 years ago, I went to a meeting of the Rough Riders, which is a Twin Cities conservative club. They were having someone speak from Blue Cross Blue Shield. And so I thought, what the hell, these are my fellow Americans. I should be able to go in there and feel comfortable with them. And I spoke with the Blue Cross Blue Shield guy ahead of time, a little bit, just told him what my business was. And I was in the healthcare business. And during his talk, he talked a little bit about Obamacare, and the hands went up. And half a dozen times people would say, when are we going to get rid of that Obamacare? That Obamacare is so terrible. And they went on like that for a while. And, being a very conservative group, I kind of expected some of that. But surprisingly, the guy from the podium, the guy from Blue Cross Blue Shield, called on me and he said, well, why don't you tell us what your answer is?
On the spot.
And I was on the spot and I wasn't thinking about it. And I said, well, I've been listening to a lot of whining here going on today. I haven't heard one good idea. So I'm going to do a parenthesis here on the respect and listening respectfully. I think you also have to add, you can be direct. I haven't heard one good idea, but I'd like to tell you about my idea and what we're doing. we are going to our patients rather than having our patients come to us. We're servicing homeless shelters, group homes, retirement communities, jails, people that normally don't get access to healthcare. 98% of our business is Medicare and Medicaid, supported by the government. But you know what's interesting? And this is the economic frame in parentheses. We're taking huge costs out of the healthcare system. We're intervening earlier. We're teaching people how to take care of themselves. We're keeping people out of the emergency rooms. And, you know, as an example, Mr. Podium Speaker, you had a patient who we recorded is going to the emergency room 80 times in a year. We reduced that down to 4 times. Think about what that's savings. And so what I did was come back at them and said, but that's not the reason we do this. The reason we do this is that person I just referred to is someone's son, someone's brother, someone's father who needs care, who can't get it in the normal way that you think he should. And they deserve that care. So if you want to talk about it afterward, room's quiet. I thought, well, let me see, you know, I don't see the tiki torches yet. We break for drinks. I had 7 or 8 people come up to me and ask me about, you know, what is that? So, you know, maybe the summary is liberals use weasel words and maybe and, you know, apologize ahead of time. I think in some ways, if you're in the den of the torchbearers there, that you cannot give an inch. You have to come across a little bit more aggressively in this thing, but you also need to pivot to what you feel and what you believe in there, even though the frame is economic, the frame gets transferred to, hey, these are human beings. Anyway, end of speech, but.
And
So
how
here's
many?
what I heard in that, Hobie.
Yeah.
And that was a great story, and I really liked it, and I liked how you talked about it. And I liked the program that you were employed with the organization. But what I heard there was you knew your audience going in, and you compelled, or in this case, I would say commanded respect. You knew what you were talking about. You stated it very directly, and so they could respect you, even though they may not have been on your side to begin with. They still respected what you said. And like you said, a number of them came to you afterwards to talk to you about it because you lit up some brain cells somewhere.
How many people were at that event?
35, 40 people.
35, and you got 7 or 8.
Yeah.
So my calculation isn't too far off, saying sometimes you offer another way of thinking about things, and about 30% of the time people will turn around and go, you know, no, I never thought of it that way. And and in your case, they want to know more. So these people aren't unreachable. And so the more we can do what Hobie did, and what Kristen does at the door, you know, why not start to turn them around? That's strategic framing. It means we might not win them in this moment, but we may win them over the long haul. And that's what we have to do, because we may be in for a long haul. And we're the people who have to keep these ideas alive should we all end up in re-education camps. No. Sorry, I didn't want to scare anybody.
Yeah, let's leave on that note.
So,
All right. Well, thanks, everybody.
Sounds good. And we'll also include a link to the recording in there. And someone had asked about the recording, so we will do that. And so have a good one, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Good stuff. Thank you.
Okay. connectionslab.org